Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening if you're in the UK, as our author is today. I'm Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and it is a delight to have Sarah Pearse back with us today. She's going to be discussing her brand new book, The Retreat, which is a follow-up to Sanatorium. Sorry if you could see that. But I'd like to read this nice bio. We don't do this often enough. Sarah Pearse grew up in Devon, England, and studied English literature and creative writing at the University of, in the UK, you'd say Warwick, right?
That's exactly, yeah. I know you guys do say it differently.
We would say Warwick, before completing a postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism. The Sanatorium, her debut, was an instant New York Times bestseller and #1 Sunday Times bestseller. And it was selected as a Reese's Book Club pick. The Retreat is her second novel. So welcome. It's great to have you with us, Sarah.
Oh, and thank you so much for inviting me back. I really enjoyed our chat last time, so it's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, and we have not received the autographed. Sarah has signed some of the UK copies for us, and we should be getting those very shortly. This is the US version. We don't have signed ones, but you can read it just the same. So I'll go ahead and put links to both editions in the comments field. And if you have questions for Sarah as they occur to you, just go ahead and type them in, and Barbara will bring me back on screen towards the end of the hour. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm looking at my reflection and realizing there's no way to get the lighting right. So I'm going to be this mysterious creature. I love it. It's actually kind of neat. We had a wonderful visit with Sarah for the Sanatorium, which was, if I remember right, one of our first mystery books of the month when it published. So it's wonderful to have you back. Sarah, what is it about, there's a lot of confusion, I think, about locked room mysteries as opposed to the sort of, and then there were none design, which really isn't a locked room mystery, because a locked room mystery is an impossible crime. And the whole point of it is the how of it, not the who of it or the why of it, but how did it happen? And I think it's getting kind of confused. And so, the Sanatorium, let's talk about that for a minute for anybody who didn't join us last time.
Yeah.
How, it's not really a locked room mystery, is it?
No, definitely not. I think, and interestingly, it's funny you say that, because I've had quite a few sort of written questions for interviews, and they do describe both as a locked room mystery. And as you say, a locked room mystery is the why, how the murder could be committed, essentially when there's kind of no way in or out. So for example, you have the kind of case, I suppose, of someone using ice which would melt, or for example, kind of within a room, or any of those sort of ingenious examples. And I think that's almost a genre unto itself. Whereas I suppose sort of more of a closed circle mystery, as this would be seen, is you kind of have that sort of limited pool of suspects, and they are in an isolated location, but there is a sort of way in and out. So I think, it's something a little bit different about it. But yeah, in the Sanatorium, I suppose both would describe them in that way. We have a limited pool of suspects, and we follow in the Retreat, particularly, and in the Sanatorium, a cast of characters. We have Ellen, the detective, in the Sanatorium, and she obviously appears in the Retreat as well. And we see this sort of closed cast of characters, all who have, I suppose, plausible reasons for committing the crime. And I think that's the exciting thing as the author, into digging into sort of how and why it happened. But yeah, the locked room is more, as you say, the why, not focusing on who the person is.
It's interesting. There's been a whole wave of them. And I wonder how much the pandemic, you note in your afterword for the book. I always read the afterword. And for those of you who don't, I recommend that when the book is complete, when you finish reading it, that you read the afterword, because there's a lot of cool stuff in there. And one of them is that Sarah points out she wrote The Retreat during lockdown. And I'm wondering, Sarah, do you think that the really large number of books that go to these, islands or other isolated locations, could be Ruth Ware at Oxford, or Alice Feeney is coming up with, in Daisy Darker, an old house you can only reach by crossing the beach when the tide is out, sort of like Mont Saint Michel, but in Devon. Do you think that the pandemic inspired that, or do you think it's a sort of larger literary movement where an older form is coming back into fashion?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, actually. And I think going back to the sanatorium, lots of people, I suppose, weren't entirely sure sort of how long the book takes from being written to coming out. And a lot of people, I think, thought the sanatorium was written during the sort of pandemic. But the retreat actually was. And I was at a book group for my UK tour, and someone asked, actually, do you see the pandemic working its way overtly into your fiction? And I thought, that's a really good question. I actually thought, I think it has, but subconsciously. So I think in the retreat, when we were in, and as you mentioned, kind of other books, while we were going through the pandemic, actually a lot of the themes, a lot of the kind of experiences, I suppose, we were all feeling, worked their way probably subconsciously into the book. So while it doesn't reference the pandemic in any way, I think we probably all drew on those experiences. And I think definitely for Ellen, and I suppose her fears and insecurities about being kind of alone and isolated, that for me definitely played into the work. So, but yeah, I mean, I suppose it could be seen as a wider movement, because I suppose before the pandemic, like the sanatorium, we had Lucy Foley's books, etc., were written prior to that period. So I suppose it could be seen as something wider than that.
I think so. I mean, I think the locked room mystery is making a comeback too. It's wonderful. There's I've always thought, after years of study, I haven't always thought, let me rephrase that. I have thought after years of study that in fact, literary genres, in particularly in crime fiction, have about a 20-year, i.e. a generational role. So something is popular and then maybe it attracts too much attention and it kind of dies down, and something else comes up and then back we go. And I do find there's been a stunning number of mysteries that play upon And Then There Were None, the Christie, and not necessarily from British authors. There have been a number of American authors who have, written a similar form. But then, I see this summer in particular, if I really look at it, Ruth Ware, Lisa Jewell, Alice Feeney, and you. And the books are all very different, different voices and all, but they're all kind of in that either closed circle. Well, they are in the closed circle because none of them is actually a locked room mystery. And Alice actually specifically says in the end of Daisy Darker that it's an And Then There Were None story. I mean, the characters say that, which I think is fascinating.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So, you have to ask yourself to some degree if there really are any new plots after Agatha Christie.
Yeah, I was thinking interestingly about this whole kind of isolated thing. And one of the first books, I suppose, that I loved in an isolated location is Lord of the Flies. You go back to that kind of very isolated location. And I think what William Golding does so well is that stripping away, I suppose, of people's kind of cares and kind of, I suppose, empathy for other people that you might get in a setting that's away from society. I think that's something as a theme in fiction is probably easier to do. I mean, you can have it in a house in a kind of suburban location, but I think when you almost physically have those characters isolated, the psychological effects you get kind of within the characters in your book is definitely emphasized. I think you have that idea that sort of, and I think you see that definitely in And Then There Were None, the idea that all of those things which might stop you from doing something, be it on the mainland or kind of in your usual environment, are pulled away. And I definitely see in the retreats, kind of reading back through, we have the characters, particularly Hannah, who is a part of the group of guests on the island. She very much in her day-to-day life kind of keeps a lid on her feelings and emotions. But I think out here, it's like a kind of pot bubbling over. And I think outside of those norms, the characters are able to do that. And I think as an author, that's something really exciting to explore.
I agree with you. And, and I was also thinking that really to make it work, you not only have to find this enclosed, isolated setting, but you have to populate it with people, most of whom are really unpleasant or hiding secrets or, because you've only got a few people to stir up the drama. So as part of the fun of writing this for you, creating, because you have some really interesting characters in this, particularly Jo. And then Maya at the end, I think, comes into her own. I don't want to do any spoilers here.
Yes.
It's a really terrific ending.
Thank you.
And so, you must not only have to spend a lot of time thinking about the setting, creating your or finding your island, in your case, off the coast of England, rather than, I'm trying to remember, was the sanatorium in France or Switzerland?
It was Switzerland, actually. Yeah.
Right. So you come back home,
Exactly.
but you also have to spend, it would seem to me, a huge amount of time bringing each of these characters to life and giving them this backstory. And then you have to explore the backstory in the news story.
Exactly. It's quite a challenging thing to do in some ways. I mean, I think a lot of the backstory, one of the things, like you say, it's a fun challenge as an author, is exploring those characters and their kind of, not only their dynamics and relationships with each other, but what they're hiding from each other. And I think that's the key to a good mystery, is the idea that the characters don't know everything about each other. And I think almost kind of chapter by chapter, you seed what they don't know. And you as the reader probably have the inside track on exactly what those secrets are, because not every character kind of within the family group in the retreat are aware of that. And yeah, it's a very exciting process, but you kind of, there's an element of sort of misdirection that comes into play. And I think, yeah, it's kind of knowing when to pull back with the backstory and how much to leave in. And there's a certain sort of process involved in doing that. And that's helpfully where my editors come in, because I think, yeah, sometimes it's quite hard to know how much to sort of pull in and how much to leave there, but hopefully it kind of pulls together at the end.
Well, that's really true. I mean, you can't write it in a linear fashion, and you have to decide, how much of your hand to reveal as you bring in the backstory. So pacing is a really important part, in order to keep up the tension.
Yeah.
And I thought you did that super well. And interestingly, in the sanatorium, you had people who weren't all related, but in this book, mostly they are, at least in the current cast. So it's kind of depressing to think there are families like that.
Most definitely. And lots of people have said, is this your direct family experience? And I'd say no. But I think one of the things I was interested in the book in general and fascinates me, I suppose I touch on it in the sanatorium between Ellen the detective and her brother Isaac, is sort of the sibling relationship and the sibling sort of bond. And I'm fascinated, I suppose, by the idea of kind of who we are as children and how that translates as adults. And I think we see, I suppose, almost like the setting in stone of character. In the retreat, we have Hannah, and she's sort of seen as the very sort of moderate, stable sibling. And we have Bea, who's the kind of academic one, Joe, who's slightly flighty, a sportier character. And I really wanted to say how much of that is kind of set in stone as we become adults, and how flexible that is. I think Hannah gets very frustrated with that role and wants to break free of it. And yeah, I'm intrigued to see sort of how much we know about our siblings when we're sort of out of that enforced intimacy you have as children, when you're in the same house. I think I was excited to think, actually, even as children, how much did we know each other? You assume you do, but there are lots of sort of secrets and lies, as we see in the book.
Well, that's really true. And, the order of placement of children in the family also helps dictate that, and the wider the age gap, the less you really know about your siblings. Your experience of your family is quite different. I'm the oldest child, and my brother, the youngest, is 7.5 years younger. I've talked to Lee and Andrew Child quite a lot about their relationship, because Andrew is almost like Lee's child. He is so much younger, so in many ways, it's not even a sibling relationship. It's almost more like an uncle and nephew or parent and child thing, because of the age gap. And I thought you did that really well in the retreat. I mean, you foreshadow some of it very well, but I still think it's a big surprise at the end when we find out just how it is. Right.
How messy the kind of relationships are between them. But I think there's sometimes a friction, like you say, with the sibling order, when those kind of roles are set in play and someone sort of wants to break free from them. I think it's interesting to sort of see how the other characters react to that. And I think sort of Hannah's frustration at sort of being that very moderate one, the one that holds the peace, it kind of, it definitely comes to the fore. But yeah, I sort of watching and observing groups, and I agree, this group there is particularly sort of messy in the dynamics. But I think, there's elements of that kind of in every family.
Well, tell us a bit about the retreat, because we haven't really defined the setting of this book for anybody who hasn't read it yet.
Yeah, probably a good place to start is actually just looking at the cover. So we have a kind of an image here of this island, and also the islet, without saying too much, a smaller kind of island just off the sort of coast there. And yeah, it's a luxury retreat called Lumen that's been based on the island. And in the sanatorium, we met Ellen's partner, Will. And he's an architect, and here he's designed Lumen. And it's a bit of a controversial development all round, really, because the island itself has quite a dark past, once sort of home to a serial killer a generation ago, and before that actually a boarding school for unruly boys, actually based on sort of one that was close to where I live. And we follow a group of guests who we've mentioned here, Hannah and her sister and her cousin and their partners, as they sort of travel to this retreat for a holiday, but they're a little bit estranged. And then we have that sort of seed set, and then we have Ellen Warner, who we met in the sanatorium, who's the detective, who's back from a career break. And she's called out to the island in what seems to be a fall. Without giving away too much, a woman's fallen onto the rocks from the yoga pavilion, but yeah, it soon turns out to be anything other than straightforward for Ellen. Yeah, won't say too much more without giving it away.
No, it's really, it's wonderful that Britain, being an island and thus has islands around it, is an ideal place to be, creating. And I find it, if you go all the way back to Rebecca, mandatorily, somehow or other, these stories seem to gravitate towards Cornwall and Devon, and, which is wonderful. Anyway, the other thing I was really surprised was when you mentioned Outward Bound, because I thought it was more just a US thing. I had a difficult stepson many, many years ago, and we sent him to Outward Bound for the purposes that you described. And I didn't realize that, that was something that the UK also participated in.
Yeah, no, definitely. We have kind of all kinds of sort of residential courses, particularly, I suppose, here, because it's quite a nice sort of setting and location, kind of in cities that are, I suppose, a little bit more industrial. People will kind of come down and stay for a week, but I don't think we have anything kind of set on an island. I think there might be further along the coastline, but nothing in Devon. But I kind of sort of populated sort of that idea, again, of sort of isolation and how the people would feel. And it kind of, without saying too much about the beginning, gave me a nice sort of starting off point for the story.
Yep. No, I thought you did a wonderful job. I marked a couple of things. Oh, here, when we were talking earlier about pacing, and we're all the way up to page 287 when you bring this along, but I think it was wonderful. A pressure cooker. That's what this feels like. A pressure cooker ready to pop. Wow. I think that is such a great description of how this is going. And, it's like, because we're getting close to the end, I think you really give the reader that sense that, you've been building it and the steam is rising, and turn the page to page 288 and it's gonna start popping. That's a great line. Is that, how did you come up with that? Did it just suggest itself naturally?
It really did. And it was kind of how I was feeling when I suppose I wrote the book. Someone spoke to me the other day actually about kind of the sort of setup and those initial sort of threads, where we're kind of building sort of up to actually what happens without giving too much away. But yeah, I really had the feeling as I was writing, I was kind of laying the seeds down between the characters and the plot. And then as it sort of progressed, and as you sort of say, from a pacing point of view, I really did feel it building. And I think for me as a writer, that's probably quite a good sign, when you can kind of feel the tension brewing. And yeah, it did feel like a pressure cooker. And I think for Ellen, as I'm sort of inhabiting her, I suppose, as I'm writing, for her, that's the sensation it feels like. And for Hannah too, it was really interesting to kind of dive inside Hannah's head in this book. We had a few other points of view in the sanatorium, but not in the way we do in the retreat. And I think for her, it really does feel like a pressure cooker. She's finding more and more things out, more and kind of secrets and lies. And yeah, I felt that acutely as the writer. So it kind of felt natural to have it in the book itself.
Yeah, well, it works supremely well. So, you've mentioned different points of view. Do you think, I'm trying to remember, Rebecca, do we only see Rebecca through the eyes of Mrs. De Winter? I think we do.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
There have been some kind of follow-up versions where you get to see, there was one particularly brilliant one, I can't remember who the author is now, but I loved it. The only one I've liked, in which there were 4 different points of view. And one of them was Rebecca while she was still alive, which I thought, was
interesting. Yeah,
really brilliant. But I think to make this kind of story work, you really do have to have multiple point of view characters, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think for Ellen, purely without getting sort of on a technical basis, I think for Ellen, otherwise, that kind of complex family dynamic you have on it for the group, and almost the motivation for what kind of happens next. With Ellen, there's only a sort of, I suppose, a small way of doing that, kind of via interview, etc. And I think for me, getting inside the character's head, you really feel the sort of emotions and the understanding of why the crimes are committed. And I don't think I could have done that alone with just Ellen narrating. I don't think it would have worked.
Well, I agree with you, but Ellen is the outsider in this. I mean, the other character point of view really are, the people in this distressing family. But Ellen, being the police officer, not only is working whatever cases are involved here, but is the outsider point of view character. And I noticed once again, turning to the acknowledgement, that you're thanking the wonderful Stuart Gibbon for his detailed and always brilliant help with police procedural and terminology, and for putting up with my endless questions. And if you're not yourself a retired policewoman, and sometimes authors of crime fiction are in fact retired, you do have to have, an insider, don't you, to kind of get all the procedure right. How did you find Mr. Gibbon?
Yeah, Mr. Gibbon, actually, it was via social media, I think. He was kind of on here, sort of a lot of authors use Twitter in the UK, and he kind of sort of advertised, I suppose, his services. And I had an initial phone call with him, and it was really good. We actually did a sort of process, I suppose, of brainstorming, which was really helpful. I think one of the things I was aware of, obviously the book, it's a crime thriller. There's an element of sort of fast pacing that perhaps with a straight police procedural, you have a little bit more sort of time to play with. So I wanted to make sure I had all of the elements of the police procedural correct, while being able to do what I wanted to do with the pacing. And he was really invaluable. I think one of the elements I was, I suppose, concerned about was taking Ellen away from the mainland and onto the island. And I think having the sort of full police at her disposal was something that would have been quite tricky. I think we'd have been able to get answers about things a little bit faster. So he really helped me with kind of creating the sort of plausible scenarios, as well as purely, to be quite honest, the sort of crime scene terminology, which I don't know anything about. Like you say, I'm sure a lot of authors either know detectives, but for me, that's a huge learning curve. And yeah, I have to say, I was kind of emailing on the phone to him a lot as I continue to write the book.
Well, I think you do it very well. And some of the books that are somewhat similar, there isn't an actual police person present or involved in it. The whole thing plays out within the cast of people on certainly in the Agatha Christie, if we go all the way back there. But and then it's tricky to work out if that's true. It's really tricky to figure out how you're going to present what happened to the to the reader. If there's no one left standing,
Exactly.
how is it that the reader is going to discover what happened? So I suppose, trying to remember, so long ago since I read it, you have to bring a police presence in at the end, or somebody to explain. Is that what happened in the Christie? I think that's what happens.
Yeah, there is. And I think usually in the Christie, like you say, when she has the detective character, kind of they tie it up all at the end. But I think in this book, I think it's really nice having obviously the point of view of Hannah, and as a reader, you're learning things about the family group through them, which I think is quite interesting that Ellen isn't aware of. So I think as the reader, you kind of almost a little bit one step ahead, and she's having to pull those together. So I think there's a really fun dynamic, that juxtaposition between what the reader knows and what the detective doesn't know, that you get with that different point of view. But yeah, I think having the detective character overall was the way for me to sort of pull the story through and pull those threads together. I think just having Hannah's point of view, we'd probably have to have another guest's point of view, I suppose. But yeah, obviously as well, we have Ellen's sort of own personal journey running alongside the plot, which was really fun as well.
Well, it was. And tricky you, once again, I can't reveal how, but at the end, something happens that even Ellen doesn't know about, which I really liked it.
Oh, thank you.
I really did. I read it a couple of times just to make sure I actually had it right. And you did because the seed of it is there in the book. So, it isn't an unfair surprise. I'm not sure that fair play, that sort of old standard for golden age mysteries really comes in to the modern psychological suspense novel, but I think you did a good job with it in this particular book. So
thank you very much. And yeah, in kind of the third book, we kind of see that thread which we sort of had in the sanatorium in this book kind of tying together, and yeah, that's very really interesting to write at the moment.
So that was the question I was going to ask you. Are you oftentimes books in this genre are not don't carry over characters. They're each one complete in and of themselves, and the author has the whole world building thing to do with both place and characters. But you're writing these, is Ellen going to be a continuing character?
Well, she's definitely going to be a character. I think readers would love to see her continue from what I'm kind of hearing feedback. But she's definitely, when I started writing the book, I very much had sort of, I suppose, her character arc and this secondary sort of plot arc we've mentioned carrying on for 3 books. And in the third book I'm writing now, we kind of see that secondary sort of plot thread tied up, I suppose. But yeah, Ellen as a character could definitely kind of run. I'm interested in writing, I've got an idea for a standalone after this third book, so kind of maybe put Ellen on pause. But yeah, I definitely think as a character there's lots of room for growth. Yeah, lots more kind of cases I have in mind. So I'm quite excited to see where it goes.
Well, you know, it's interesting how authors' minds work. I mean, Lisa Jewell and I were talking last week about her book not coming out till August called, I think it's called The Family Remains. I'll have to,
Yes.
yeah. She doesn't want to write a continue. This is her continuing, and she's not doing it again. She's very emphatic about
Okay.
not doing it. And so, you know, we talked a bit about that, how for some authors, the fun is to start from zero every book.
Yeah.
And for other authors, exploring characters over a story arc is so rewarding and so interesting. And, you know, there's no right or wrong to it. It's just whatever, you know, whatever works for you.
Definitely. And I think one of the challenges for me, and something I suppose found really exciting with both of the books, is playing a little bit again with points of view and sort of form, I suppose, and really just sort of understanding how you can make that book an effective standalone, even though it's part of a series.
Yeah.
And I think it's really testing for you as an author to make sure it works and you kind of have that robust plot that can work on its own. And though I think you kind of get that depth of feeling for Ellen as a character and can watch that journey if you've read The Sanatorium, yeah, it definitely can be read as a standalone. And I think it's a really good test for how that book works as part of a series, if you can do that, and a challenge to see how you can make it fresh. I'm definitely kind of in book 3. I think as an author, you have to feel that excitement and feel like you're doing something new each time. So yeah, in book 3, I'm sort of, yeah, doing something different again. But yeah, for me, I love digging back into that character and knowing her. And I think there's still an element of surprise. When I'm writing Ellen, she does things that surprise me. And I really honestly feel I don't know her fully yet, which is so fun.
Well, yeah, I do think in talking for, you know, this is going to be our 33rd birthday in October. So Patrick and I have been doing this. He's done it almost as long as I have. We've been doing
Advanced
this
celebrations.
We are. We're actually going to have our birthday party on October 3rd with John Sanford, who's an author we've been with forever. And so I'm really, and he's doing something different too. He's actually bringing together his 2 male leads, Lucas Davenport and Virgil Flowers, in one book. So I think that's because he's writing something different for his other book. But so I like that consolidation. It's really exciting. But you're right. I mean, I think for many authors, the challenge or the fun really of writing a continuing character is finding out new things about them. And most often I have found, Sarah, that that writers doing a long series character generally write some kind of a prequel, because they've picked a point in time in which we meet that character. And then as the character develops, we realize that before we met them, they had a life. And what was that life?
Yeah,
you know, definitely. Michael Connelly did it with his 4th book for Harry Bosch. And it was the 4th. Patrick, you can correct me. Was it the 4th or the 3rd? I'm sure it was the 4th. No, I think it was the 5th, actually. Anyway, there were like 3 or 4 Harry Bosch. No, it was the 4th Harry Bosch when Harry explored the murder of his mother, which had kind of been the story arc that he pulled together. Then he wrote a different book. And then when he came back to Harry, it was a whole different thing. And, you know, and I thought Michael showed a lot of thought, you know, about how he was going to pursue this long-term character. So we've been with him the entire time because, you know, we did his first ever book of him. The Last Coyote was the 4th, and then he wrote the poet. And then when he came back to Harry, he was done with Harry's family and Harry's mother. And he said to me, and I thought this is a really important point, he said, Harry's a cop, and I need to write a book in which Harry works a case that came to him just because he was a cop. It didn't have any personal connection with him at all.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, because I think most books, I was going to say actually with The Sanatorium, it's a similar thing, actually. We reference a kind of a Haler case, which is kind of the case that kind of suppose threw Ellen off and caused the career break. And yeah, I suppose it would be interesting in The Sanatorium, it's very personal, the case. Obviously, it's her brother's fiance. And like you say, I think seeing it outside of the personal dynamic, you would see a different side of that character.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing we haven't talked about before we involve the audience is the old crime. And, you know, you have a character, is he called Creature? Do I remember that right?
That's right. Yeah, Creature.
Yep. creature. And anyway,
Oh my gosh, sorry, that I just have to say the name had that kind of reaction.
it
I
does.
don't know how it came to me, and genuinely my daughter hasn't read the book. I'm not sure whether she should at her age, but yeah, she saw the name creature and she had that kind of instinctive reaction. I thought, yeah, that's my character name.
It's perfect, but tell us how you spell it, because it's not the way one might think.
Yeah, it's Creacher.
Same pronunciation, but a different spelling. So it does feel more like a name, you know, a family name. But anyway, I guess my question is, in order to make all this work, you also had to think about what the earlier crime was. So you had to write the present plot, but you also did have to create the back plot, the thing that really haunts us all the way through the present story.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually, it's interesting you say that and how that kind of evolved for me. In an earlier sort of draft of the book, I suppose I had more of that kind of earlier crime sort of woven into the story. And it was an element of how that perhaps could become confused with the present sort of day crime. So I sort of pulled back, and it was kind of a careful balance between sort of seeding that crime and what went on in order, I suppose, to make the denouement effective, and sort of where to pull back. But yeah, that was a really fun thing to write. And I did a lot of, I suppose, my own research and sort of plotting out to make sure that worked effectively and things tied together. But it was quite a complex balancing act at times.
Well, I mean, basically you had to create 2 crime novels and then work out how to, you know, put them all together. So very, very challenging, I think.
Yeah, it's an academic puzzle. I think probably most mystery kind of authors in general would say they really enjoy. I loved sort of piecing together and kind of seeding where elements you would find out would drop in terms of both plots. So yeah, challenging, but very fun.
Do you think that the modern reader expects a longer and more complex story than, referring back again to Agatha Christie, whose books were by preference short? You know, I've always loved the idea. I know I read this somewhere. She wanted her readers, because her plots were so complicated and because of the English dinner hour, she wanted them to be short so that a person could pick up the book after dinner and read it before going to bed, because she thought if they put it down, they might, you know,
Never pick it up again.
Well, no, so much as just, you know, you had to keep the whole plot in your head as you moved along. So her ideal length for a book was something like 130 pages. And because signatures, the paper in books are bigger than that, her publishers made her write longer books so they weren't wasting like 28 sheets of paper or something of this sort. But, you know, I don't think that design holds up very well anymore. Do you?
No,
That
and I
short,
think
that very short design.
yeah, that very short design. I think it's a really good point, actually. I think also as well, readers perhaps expect another layer of complexity. I know in a lot of novels, we have almost that sort of, I suppose, time slip effect. We don't have that in the same way in The Retreat. And we don't have that sort of point of view of someone on the island at the time. But I think that kind of doing something a little bit different with the narrative, maybe, and also just having that different perspective. I don't think we always get that in those books either. And I think, yeah, I suppose readers' expectations have evolved from that point. Than where they were at the time.
And publishers too, because, you know, it hardly seems worth it for them if it isn't like 300 pages long or whatever.
Exactly.
Sort of normal. But you know what is interesting is the shorter form that Christie wrote is ideal for TV and movie, because, you know, they're necessarily shorter in a script. A normal script runs about 100 pages as opposed to a 300 and some page novel. But, you know, we keep seeing like remakes of classic Christie plots. And I think it's in part because they were short that, you know, that works. So Patrick, do you want to join us and see if we have any questions, or you want to chime in here and ask your own? I love the way he pops back in. Isn't that fun?
Yeah, there he is.
Let's see. Yeah. What do we have here? Well, you've already talked a little bit about this, but Julie says, I haven't read The Retreat yet. Is there a building as a character? I felt that the building was a character in the sanatorium.
Oh, that's a really good question, actually. I suppose less of a building. We do have the kind of, you can see it sort of briefly on the cover here. We do have the sort of retreat building, the Lumen building, but it's less, I suppose, yeah, Thank you, Patrick. Better image. It's less that. I would suppose it's more the island itself and the sort of very topography. The landscape. I think you have that sort of rocky outcrop, Reaper's Rock, which becomes, I suppose, the sort of main icon in the novel. And I think also the sort of juxtaposition, I suppose, between the retreat itself and the sort of wildness of the island. And I think you feel that landscape perhaps more than the building. But I suppose in the sanatorium, we did have both landscape and building. But yeah, a little bit different in this one. I'd say it's definitely more island than building.
I do think, it's an interesting point that there are a number of luxurious retreats and so forth that are put in wild places. And I wonder to some degree, whether people who go there are attracted to them because of that contrast, that juxtaposition. They want to feel safe and pampered, but they want to be somewhere, where it's wild and dangerous. I mean, we have those in the US all over, so.
Yeah, this is something I was discussing with, actually, really interestingly, with another group the other day, and I agree. I think that idea that, danger could be lurking, but actually you're in this luxurious sort of compound in a way is really true. I think we always kind of want to explore that slightly darker side, but know we're safe. I think that's a sort of innate part of human nature.
Yeah, we can see it a lot. And there's a whole bunch of really luxurious small ships being built to take you to Antarctica or above the Arctic Circle, and or even to the Galapagos. And I think, wow, that's encapsulates that whole, you want to be in the spa and you want to have gourmet meals and an excellent wine cellar, and you want to be like right off penguins.
And I think it's, that you're so right. And I think then kind of people have their photos for sort of social media or to show their friends of this wild landscape, but they're not really seeing the luxurious thing behind you, which is where you were when you were taking the photo.
True enough.
Yeah, it's not as it's romantic maybe when you're 20 or 21 to go out there roughing it, but not so romantic later, right?
Exactly.
Physically harder.
Yeah.
From personal experience, that definitely is you get. I'm with a friend here who's turned 70 recently, and I said to her, 70 is not bad, but 80 is really hard. I had no idea. But anyway, I'm soldiering on through it. We'll see what 90 brings. In fact, did you notice yesterday in the newsletter or whatever it was I sent out for William Kent Kruger? He's a lovely author, Sarah, and a big bestseller in the US, won lots of awards. And he has a continuing character, an Indian, Native American, who's 102, who's accused of rape in his forthcoming book, which is sort of, hilarious in and of itself. But nonetheless, people have thought, Henry just can't go on. And I wrote rather indignantly that there were plenty of centenarians, and I plan to be one. So I think that Henry still has years to go.
Yeah, you're going to be there one day.
I am, absolutely. Still talking to Patrick.
All right. I'll be on a walker,
I love that idea. Patrick's on the walker. Barbara's still there,
yeah. Let's see, Carl, you've talked about this a little bit too, but he asks, how far ahead do you plan your books? Do you have like a 2 to 3 book plan, or do you take it one book at a time?
I think it's probably an element of both. I think I'm probably splitting, I suppose, between the plot and the character arc. I think with Ellen, I kind of very much knew what kind of journey I wanted to take her on. And I think with the retreat and the island, as it's based kind of close to where I lived, that was somewhere I knew I sort of wanted to weave into the story. But yeah, I kind of very much had planned the elements of sort of what was happening in the retreat, and I suppose sort of her relationship with her partner. But there's definitely elements of the plot which kind of evolve. And maybe some authors do it differently, but I think how Ellen reacted in the retreat, and as I was writing, it probably changed book 2 and definitely changed book 3. And I think there's elements you need to kind of have, I suppose, up for being changed, as it were. But yeah, there's definitely elements I've planned in advance, but I couldn't say sort of 3 books in advance now.
Did you know the resolution of the retreat before you started writing it, or did it evolve as you wrote it?
No, I had the resolution. It depends which one, without giving too much away, actually, with the family group. But yeah, I one of them, without giving too much away, I didn't, and one of them I did, and one of them that I didn't, and I think you've touched on before, the character name. Yeah, she kind of as a character very much sort of evolved through the story, and I'd done quite a lot of sort of backstory on her, and it made more and more sense as I wrote. So that character wasn't planned.
Okay, makes perfect good sense to me, and it will too for you when you read the book.
Sarah, I just wanted to ask you, can you tell us just a little bit about your background, and where in the UK you grew up, and when did you start writing? Did you always have the aspiration to become a writer?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up actually where I'm living now. So it's part South Devon here in the UK. So right on the sort of coastline. And I was a voracious reader when I was a child. I think genuinely, I probably learned to read quite early and then didn't stop. I was a huge library fan and I used to kind of genuinely come away with my maximum limit in the UK. And then I used to sort of ask my mum if I could use her card. So I was always a huge reader and I genuinely, I suppose, wanted to be an author from the get-go. And I actually went on to study at Warwick, as you say, English and creative writing. And I think I always knew I wanted to sort of write a novel one day, but I sort of experimented with poetry and with short fiction. And I don't think in my early 20s when I left, I had a story in me. And it was something that worried me at first. I was kind of like, I finished the degree course. I don't kind of know what I've got to say or which characters I want to explore. And my sort of tutor said to me, actually, don't worry, those stories will come to you as you kind of get older. And I genuinely believe the older you get, kind of the better writer you become, I think, with life experience. And that was definitely the case. And yeah, I suppose it was after I had my children, I felt I had a little bit more to say. And I started off writing short fiction. And I had some success with sort of being placed in awards and that kind of thing and being published. And that was I suppose, the springboard for thinking I could write a novel. It was definitely challenging, though, moving from short fiction as a form to something longer. Yeah, it was hard.
Was this sanatorium your first effort, or do you have some other manuscripts in drawers?
Yeah, I have one manuscript tucked in the drawer, and it was very different. I suppose it was a family drama, you'd describe it as, and it was very much my first foray. It took me quite a long time to write, a long time to edit, and I was really sort of proud of it. But yeah, it wasn't the right story for me, I suppose. I look back at it now, and there was lots of element in terms of pacing, plotting. Yeah, I had a lot to
learn. What do they call it, Barbara? We always ask about. Invariably, there are going to be people who are aspiring writers watching. And what do they call it? The path to publication.
Yeah, that's a good phrase.
Yeah, it is a good phrase. How did you go about getting your first book published? Did you get an agent first? How did that work?
Yeah, and I mean, I hope this is kind of an inspiring thing for some people. I actually had an agent back off the sort of first novel I described. And that novel, I think one of the first challenges for an author is kind of getting an agent. And I suppose a lot of people think once you have the agent, you immediately find your publisher and that's it, kind of happy story. But that wasn't the case. And in that first novel, it didn't actually find a home. It got very close. People saw lots of good things in it. But I think the sort of core things that were wrong with the book were kind of definitely there. And I mean, it may have found a home eventually, but I don't think it would have been the sort of launch book for me. But yeah, for me, that sort of initial process was very much through the slush pile. So I don't know if it's called a similar thing in the US, but you kind of send in your first 3 chapters and a covering letter. And yeah, that was my path to publication. I had a few kind of agents offering to represent me, which was great. And then met with my agent and decided from there. And then with the sanatorium, once that novel was wrote, that was actually placed quite quickly with a publisher within a week. So yeah, that was a very happy story off the back of a lot of angst with the first novel.
Was the sanatorium your original title?
Yes. Oh, another great question, actually. It was my first title. And in the UK, it was originally going to be something different. I think there was the thought that maybe people didn't know what a sanatorium was, perhaps. But in the US, it was kind of always going to be the sanatorium. So yeah, it stayed as the original, which I was really happy with.
Let's see here. Well, Carl would like to know, who does your social media? Do you do it yourself or does the publisher? Or...
Oh no, I do it all myself. There's posts you'll kind of see on my publisher's feed that they do, which are linked to me. But yeah, one of my highlights, I think, of my writing journey, and definitely writing during the pandemic, was connecting with readers directly, and particularly on Instagram and Facebook. We have that kind of, I suppose, almost like a one-to-one connection. And I genuinely, the biggest part of why I write is readers and getting their feedback. Yeah, so I do all of my social media, respond to everyone on my own, and yeah, I love it.
Let me add then, and I didn't touch on this when Sarah and I were talking, but one of the characters in the book, in fact, is a major social media influencer. Yeah. And I could tell that you must have done some yourself in order to do that. I do the Instagram for the bookstore, but honestly, I don't have time for it. And so yes, I never answer a direct message. In fact, I don't even know how. And I'm sure that that's really frustrating for people who follow us on Instagram. But the thing is, if I started, I would never get off it. I just,
Yeah,
it would be a time sink that I truly can't afford in all of the different jobs that I do. And so I realize I'm
yeah,
really not the right person, to do
yeah,
Instagram, but I haven't figured out how to go about it. We'll figure,
yeah.
at some point. But I admire you if you actually answer all your direct messaging and other things. Good for you.
Oh, thank you very much. No, I genuinely, I really appreciate, particularly kind of on Instagram, there's a really sort of, I suppose, connected community and quite a passionate community, and sort of the time they take to write reviews and sort of connect with you. Yeah, I really sort of appreciate it. But no, it is, as you say, hugely time consuming as well.
Yeah, similar question on Facebook and on YouTube. Who do you like to read for pleasure? And do you have any recommendations on things that you're reading right now?
Oh, who do I like to read for pleasure? I read really widely. I think a lot of people sometimes think, yeah, you kind of only read thrillers if you like thrillers. One of my sort of favorite authors, and I suppose someone I'd recommend to everyone, is Sarah Waters. So she writes sort of mainly historical fiction. And one of her books actually is directly inspired, I suppose, both of mine, The Little Strangers. So she's a big favorite. She hasn't had a novel out for a while, so I'm kind of eagerly waiting. I love Jane Harper as well. Her books I find hugely atmospheric. She kind of really has brilliant settings. And a new author actually I've discovered, an American author recently, who I'm loving, and I've just finished an arc which I love, is Stacey Willingham. She wrote A Flicker in the Dark, which, yeah, I found amazingly atmospheric in every way, kind of really rooted in its location. And for me here in the UK, kind of how she sort of conjured up swampy Louisiana was, yeah, just amazing. I also love Helen Dunmore. She sadly passed away, but her prose is just lyrical and beautiful. I love Joe Nesbo for his thrills. So yeah, a huge amount.
Do you ever find yourself now, I'm sure you do, reading a new book and saying, shit, I wish I'd thought of that. I wish I thought of that idea.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in so many thrillers, and I think you probably do it with your own work as well. I'm sure in kind of a few years' time, I'll be critical and think, I wish I'd done that here. And you can think of things, but no, people are really kind of innovative with form and setting. And yeah, one of my other favorite authors actually is Michelle Paver. And I think I potentially one day have a ghost story in me. I kind of, lots of people have said in the sanatorium, do you tip towards the supernatural? And I'd say I'm tiptoeing towards the supernatural, but it has to be done so carefully. I think you kind of have to commit to it. You can't shy away. So that's a challenge and something, yeah, I really admire in other authors, and I hope I get there one day.
Do you like Shirley Jackson?
Yes, I do. Yes, yeah.
Let's see here. Carl, again. Let's see. A couple of questions.
Ooh.
He says, I really enjoy these book events that we do. Thank you very much. He's listening in from Birmingham, UK. Any advice to new and inspiring or aspiring writers?
Yeah, I think probably something I touched on before, actually, around, I suppose, pressure on timings. I think it's something I speak about at kind of book groups sometimes, is the idea that you kind of either have to, a lot of pressure of being like a young writer or getting something done to a deadline. And I think when you're initially writing, the key is to kind of get started and explore, I suppose, take your time with reading, understanding what you like to read and what you like in a book. And don't put yourself under too much pressure. I know lots of people say, give yourself a deadline, make sure you kind of get it finished. But I think that can almost put people off before they get out of the starting blocks. I think you've got to find an idea you're really excited by initially and explore that idea, see where it takes you. And I suppose the sort of cliche is don't give up. You kind of work chapter by chapter and don't, again, put yourself under too much pressure to get things kind of perfectly done the first time. I think when I started writing The Sanatorium, I was obsessed with getting things right on a line by line level, quite naively, because obviously my editors would come along and cut the lines I'd spent kind of hours crafting. So yeah, it's sort of get that plot down, but don't put yourself under that pressure. Don't feel something has to be published. Give yourself manageable goals, maybe even start off with short fiction. But yeah, kind of sit down and write, and don't kind of feel like you have to be perfect from the get-go.
Did you start with an idea first, plot idea, or did that come naturally out of the character? So was it character first or plot first?
Yeah, I had Ellen as a character in mind, I suppose. I didn't know she was going to be a detective. I had this idea of someone who's quite emotionally raw and vulnerable, which is something, and I suppose almost putting everything out there in a way I hadn't read before in this kind of crime thriller novel, particularly, and I suppose the detective character, the juxtaposition of that kind of really excited me. So I had her, but it was probably the idea of The Sanatorium that made me know that this was a crime thriller and this is where I was going to place my detective. when I initially read the article about the sanatorium and had this atmospheric building, I knew it was leading to some kind of crime thriller plot. So yeah, kind of a mix between the two, I think.
Gotcha. Let's see. Okay, the inevitable question. Have you sold the film or TV rights for either book?
Yes, I have actually. So that happened last year, which is hugely exciting. And kind of things are rumbling on, but I'm sure, as you know, the rights don't kind of guarantee it gets made, but I'm keeping my fingers firmly crossed.
Well,
It must
that
be
is exciting. Very, very nice. You know, Patrick, if there aren't any more questions, it's quite late in the UK, so perhaps we ought to.
Oh, sure it is. Yep,
Oh,
absolutely.
We
Let me
ought to let
check.
Sarah, sign off, have a healthy drink. I mean, we can't, we do BYO for most of BYOB for most of our events, Sarah, but at this hour, better girl, I'm sticking to
yes.
tea, right? Right, and there's Patrick, but nonetheless, we should let you go. But thank you for agreeing to talk to us again. I just love talking to you about the sanitarium, and I'm glad that we have a chance now to talk about the retreat. Now we have a new book to look forward to.
Oh, thank you so much. Genuinely, I really love chatting to you and answering all your questions. So thank you.
Well, maybe
Do you have a title, Sarah, for the third
Oh,
book?
sorry.
Did you already mention it?
I don't as yet, Patrick, but it's coming soon.
Gotcha. Okay.
Title is
I'll
often a
let you-
collaborative effort between the author and the sales department at the publisher. So
Right.
Very much so.
they can come much later than the book. Although, that's an interesting question, Sarah, because there are some authors who have told us that they can't write the book until they have a title.
Yeah, I kind of have sort of loose ideas in mind, but it's it's focusing in. I have, without giving too much away about the plot, I kind of have 3 ideas that I'm kind of passionate about that are sort of woven together, and it's hard to work out which one should take the lead for the title. So yeah, I think it will be a discussion with my editors and sort of consensus as to which one works best.
Great. So we'll
maybe
call
the
it
bunker.
Untitled Sarah Pearse #3, which is how these, we have a number of books in our system called Untitled Ian Rankin, or whatever.
Number 3.
Works out that way. But anyway, I do hope you'll have a chance to come to Scottsdale, but we should, in all fairness, try to get your US publisher to move your date to winter.
Yes, exactly.
I know it's hard, but anyway, thank you very much, Sarah. Congratulations. I don't think I mentioned that the retreat's already on the New York Times bestseller list for next week. So that's a really wonderful.
Wow, that's great.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, very exciting.
How did it do in England? Are you on the Times list as well?
We haven't had a full week's figures yet, actually. I'm waiting to see. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, chances are it will be. Anyway, this is the new Sarah Pearse bestseller, The Retreat. And if you didn't read The Sanatorium, you don't have to read it in order to read The Retreat. But why deprive yourself of the pleasure of starting with The Sanatorium and then coming
It's
to
in
the
paperback,
retreat,
right? Yep.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Good night, Sarah.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Take care.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.